Oh, blue eyes. Oh, blue eyes. Joe is my husband. Um,
Well, well, he was.
and see Spencer, there we go. There we
Yep.
go with
Yep.
inappropriate.
Yep. Yep.
This is our way of coping.
Yep.
So back off.
Yep. Yep.
Um, okay, Caegan said was
Was.
Joe was my husband, and he passed away unexpectedly in December of 2020.
Okay.
Would you, I mean, or would you like for me to give the history of the relationship?
Surely, yes, yes. I think everyone would like to hear. I think it's an interesting story.
Okay. Well, Joe and I grew up together. We went to the same church, we went to the same school, and we had a brief little high school romance. But then we broke up, and we both
Who
moved
broke
on.
up with who?
Do what?
Who broke up with who?
Oh, Caegan. Do we have to do that?
Yeah.
I broke up with him. He wrote me the sweetest letter ever that a boy has written a girl, and asked me to choose him, and I did not. And we both moved on. We and both married other people, had other lives separately for almost 20 years. And then he became unmarried, and I became unmarried, and he was a funeral director, and we reconnected some 20 years later at a funeral. And I was 2 years older than him. So, our relationship in high school was a little bit scandalous because I was 12th grader and he was a 10th grader. But we reconnected at a funeral, and he sent me a message later that night that said, "You're holding up pretty well for an older girl, aren't you?" And that was that was it. Yeah. That the rest is history. So we married. Do what?
That was the real end. Like he kind of got you on the top of it where like you had to respond. You couldn't
Oh
just
yeah.
ignore what he said.
He was smooth. He knew what he was doing. And so we got married, and eventually moved back to Seven Springs, which is where I grew up, and lived a very happy life together. We lived right beside his parents on a pond. It was very picturesque, and I kind of felt like it was my happily ever after. Things had finally worked out the way they were supposed to, and they were absolutely wonderful. But he had a blood clot that traveled to his lungs in the middle of the night, and he passed away about 18 months ago. So that was the love story.
And the interesting thing about Joe's death is, and we don't think he knew something was going to happen. Because, let's be honest. Joe was not the healthiest of people. Joe was a smoker. And in fact, we buried him with a pack of Marlboro Lights.
We did.
And he loved good old Southern fried, smothered in gravy type food. But what happened to him was kind of an accident, right? I mean, it sort of happened out of the blue, right?
It did. He had a heart condition. His heart would jump out of rhythm. And so, he had seen a cardiologist for that, and actually had a surgical procedure that corrected it. And after that, he had to stay on different medications. One of them was a blood thinner, for about a year after the procedure. But he had, come off each of those medications, and about, I don't know, 8 or 10 weeks prior to his death, had been completely cleared. He was no longer considered a cardiac patient. So, everything checked out, and he was in good health.
Right. And so what I'm getting at here is that, we don't think Joe knew he was going to die, but a lot of interesting coincidences happened right before he died, didn't they?
Sure. Let's see.
Well, can I say the ones that I remember before you talk about the night he died?
Sure.
Because I want to say, Joe was my stepdad, and obviously, like, me and my dad have a great relationship, so it's like that's not always the case with divorced parents, so it was things were kind of weird between me and Joe for a few years just because we didn't quite know how to go about each other.
Right.
But that relationship blossomed. But I remember literally like a week before he died, it was weird because he tried to do things with me. Like he asked me out of the blues, like, do you want to go shoot skeet? And I was like, what? He was like, you want to go shoot skeet? And I was like, I'm good. Like, that's not really something we do, and it were things like that. And I remember he bought Cameron a gun, right?
He did.
Out of the blue.
Yeah. He was good to both of you, and he loved both of you a lot, but he was not openly affectionate.
No.
And so, both of those things were out of character.
Right. And so then the night he died was very, very interesting because.
Well, okay. Well, let's back up a little. Should we back up as far as the pictures, the family pictures?
Yes. I forgot about that.
All right. So in October, we did family pictures, and we hadn't done them in about 5 years, and it just kept coming up with excuses not to do them. But I just felt a nudge to take the pictures. So we made an appointment, and everybody was mad at me because we had to get dressed up and go do these pictures. And then you got sick, Caegan, and so we had to cancel the appointment. And I thought,
that woven.
You did not.
I thought I had it.
Thought you had it. So we canceled, and I said, well, not meant to be. Well, then later that week, the photographer called me on a Thursday and said, I have a last minute opening on Friday if you'd like to do it. And it made everyone in my family so upset, but I just had a feeling that we just needed to do it. So we did. And those pictures were they were beautiful pictures, and they were returned to me. The proof, I had to look at the proofs and all that. And I got the pictures on December the 3rd, and Joe died on December the 5th. So, I almost didn't take those pictures, and they ended up being, something so precious because they would be the last pictures that we had. Then we were on the day that he died on a Friday. I had actually taken off work, and I did not want to. That was back when, we were still virtual with COVID, and it was just such a big deal to miss school. So I almost did not take the day. But a mutual friend of ours had passed away, ironically, much like Joe did. He was the same age as Joe. He was 43. We, childhood friend, and we had to go to his funeral. And so I took the day off, and we went to the funeral. And I have a prayer journal that I write in every morning when I have my time with Jesus. And I wrote, Joe and I had planned to go out to dinner that night, and I wrote in my journal, Caegan is planning to go to a state game tomorrow. Cameron is headed to the mountains. Joe and I have a date night after the funeral. All is right in my little world. And at that time, I wrote that on Friday morning, and by Saturday morning, Joe was with Jesus. But we went to that funeral, and even though it was so sad, he saw so many people that he had not seen in years. He had so many conversations with people, and we stood outside of the funeral and spoke with the man that Joe had worked for many, many years at the funeral home. His name is Lynn Taylor. And Lynn was semi-retired. And so Joe, as a joke, said, Lynn, I want you to come out of retirement to handle my funeral. And Lynn said, oh, well, I'll be so old when that happens. I probably won't be able to. And as a joke, he said, but Rhonda, you do have my cell phone number, don't you? And as a joke, I looked at my phone. I said, gosh, Lynn, I don't. And so I put his number in my phone about 8 hours before I needed it. Then we went to the funeral. We left. We went to dinner. He loved a steak. So we went to his favorite restaurant. We got a steak. It was so good. And he did not like the color pink on a man. And so I was just picking on him. We had been to that funeral, and I told him I was going to make him wear a pink shirt. I was going to put a pink shirt on him when he died. And so as a joke, he said, no, I want you to put me in this outfit. Well, then he went on, and sitting at that table, he told me who he wanted to speak at his funeral, who his pallbearers should be, the songs he wanted. He literally planned his entire funeral less than 6 hours before he passed away.
Wild, isn't it?
It is.
That is wild.
It's wild.
That's like something you read in a book.
And I'll tell you one more thing. I am such a sleepyhead. I mean, I am just asleep before my head hits the pillow. So when we left, typically we would have just, gone home and I would have gone to bed. But that night, we were almost home, and he said to me, let's go see your daddy. Let's go see if your daddy's in the shop. My dad has a barn, a man cave. And I was so sleepy and I didn't want to, but something just said, you need to go. So we did. And my sister and brother were there, and we had the best time with them. He and my dad planned to have breakfast the next morning. I mean, it was just a great visit. And then we went home, and normally, Joe would go to the bathroom and do all the get ready stuff he does for bed. And I would be asleep before he got in the bed. But that particular night, I had not fallen asleep, and we laid in the bed and we laughed and talked. The last thing I remember is laughing and looking at the clock, and it was about 11. I mean, we literally laughed ourselves to sleep. And by 2:30 the next morning, he was with Jesus.
It's that is there's no words that I can say that other than just wow.
Yeah.
But it gets better though, because there is another I don't know if you call it coincidence or not, but there's another piece to that story, and it was super important to your what's the word I'm looking for here?
Healing?
Your healing. There you go. So for those who don't know, what is the Book of Joe, and how did you stumble across the Book of Joe?
The Book of Joe is a blog that I wrote weekly for a little more than a year after Joe's death. And it was a combination of some mini sermons that Joe had written, and I'll explain that in a minute, and stories about us, and then how I related those sermons to wherever I happened to be in the grief process. But the way that all that came about was Joe and I were both very involved in church. I was a Sunday school teacher. He was Sunday school superintendent. And he would give this like mini sermon, this little 5-minute sermon to everybody in church on Sunday before we dismissed to our Sunday school classes. And he would write his notes for the sermon on just whatever, a receipt, an old scratch piece of paper. And he would take it up there to read. And so I bought him a black leather notebook and a cross pen. I wanted him to have something pretty to write these sermons in, and he used it. He wrote his sermon in there every week, and then that's what he read from at church. So Joe passed away on December the 5th, and on the day before Christmas Eve, I was in his office trying to wrap Christmas presents, and I wasn't doing a very good job. I don't remember purchasing a single present that year. I know I did because, we had them, but I do not remember any of that. But I was in the office and I was trying to wrap presents, and it was his office. So all of his things were there. And I was just kind of walking around, touching all of his stuff. And I knocked a stack of books over. And when I did, I knocked that black notebook off. And I opened it, and when I opened it backwards. And so the first sermon I saw was the last one he wrote. And that one was on March 15th, 2020. That was the last time we had regular church before COVID. So I hadn't seen that book in months and months and months. I had forgotten about it. But on that day when I was missing him so bad, that book literally fell into my lap. And the sermon, I don't remember him delivering this one on March 15th, but it was exactly what I needed to read right then. And it was called A Season for Everything. And, it used the scripture from Ecclesiastes about a time to live, a time to die, a time to mourn. And it talked about how sometimes we as Christians think that if we do like we're supposed to, that we won't or we shouldn't have to suffer. And he related that to seasons of the year and how we can't have spring without winter. And then, he went on to talk about how God uses our suffering for good, and that, we can take our seasons of suffering and use them to help someone else who might be suffering as well. And that just, I felt like it was Joe and Jesus, whispering directly in my ear. And I couldn't get it off my mind. So that weekend, I sat down, and I wanted everybody to know I had that experience. So I didn't know how to make a blog. I just found a free blog site, and I put his sermon in there, and I explained how I had found the book. And then, I added my own little snippet to the end of it about, how I was sharing it, because I felt like Joe was telling me that I needed to use what I was going through to help somebody else. And, I put it on Facebook, and it was well received. And people began to ask me if there were any more sermons in the book. Well, yeah, I had a book full of them. So Sundays were very difficult for me. That was our family time together. So the next Sunday, honestly, I was just sitting at home, and what I needed to do was fill those hours because I was so miserable and sad. And so I pulled that black book out, and I read another one of his sermons, and it was like it was speaking to my situation so perfectly. So again, I wrote it, and then, I would always tell a story about us, and then I would use the sermon, and then I would relate that sermon to my grief journey. And it just became something that I did every Sunday as a way to help me, but also, as a way to help others who might be struggling with not just grief, but any kind of loss. And what I learned over time was, that being able to get my thoughts down on paper like that was probably one of the most healing things that I was able to do after he passed away.
I'm going to have to read that because I'd heard a lot about it from Caegan talked about it, which Caegan, I'm sure, has told you. I mean, me and him on road trips, we would just find ourselves talking in hotel rooms at night while we were doing laundry one night. And I had heard about all this, but hearing you tell it, it's different, absolutely different. And it's an unbelievable story. I mean, I get goosebumps right now just hearing it.
Well, it has been very important to me all this time. I couldn't make sense of it. It just didn't seem very fair. And it's not ever fair when you lose somebody you love. But I could not get the idea out of my head that something good has to come. I felt like if my suffering could help somebody else. I read one time that maybe you share in your suffering because there's someone else who would drown in their own tears if they didn't know you had cried them too. And that, that stuck with me, that, people just need to know that it's a horrible place to be in, but there's not 1 second of your suffering that Jesus is not by your side. And you can look back at all those things that happened to me, and you can literally see the handprint of God on us for months before he passed away.
Did you ever think the blog would grow the way it did? or get the response that it did?
I had no clue that it would be so well received. And really and truly, I noticed as it continued that, it had more followers, and, but it was still, I thought, mostly just people that knew me and knew Joe. It was a connection to Joe, and that's why, people liked it and were reading it. But I had a health scare several months ago and ended up having to go through several biopsies and ultrasounds. And I was having one of those procedures done, and I met a nurse in the hallway, and she looked at me, and then she turned and she looked again, and she said, "Oh my gosh, do you write the book of Joe?" Like, she recognized my face, even with a mask on, from the blog. I said, "I am." She said, "Well, you don't know me and I don't know you, but I just wait on Sunday evenings for that to come out. It has really helped my journey with Christ." And that was just sort of mind blowing.
Do you still do those, or have you just kind of?
Well, I did them regularly every Sunday, for almost a year. And I got to the end of the notebook. I got, and there were a few other, like, he had written some on other sheets of paper, but when I got to the end of the notebook, it sort of coincided with a time when they got harder to write, just as time passed. And I guess I made a little more progress in my grief journey. It almost sometimes made me sad to write them. And so I took a break, and I've gone back a couple of times and written more. It's actually funny that you asked me that, because it has really, really been on my heart the past couple of weeks to write another one. Because I am in a different place with all that. But what I've figured out is, you don't get cured from grief. It doesn't ever, it's not linear. It doesn't ever go away. It's not something that you overcome. You just learn, how to deal with it. So I still think there are things to say and lessons to learn. So there's another one coming. I just don't know when.
I will definitely be looking for that.
Thank you.
And I was talking about the reaction, that you got from it. It ended up becoming pretty big. I mean, I know you showed me all the different kinds of people that saw it. I mean, there were people around the world that read the blog. Am I wrong?
No, that's right. There were, well, it shows you, you can see your statistics, and it'll show you a map. And there were people on every continent reading the blog at one point. That's
why. I mean, and how did it ever get that? You know what I mean? Like, how? I mean, I guess one person shared it with another person who shared it, but I mean, that's just.
We talk about all the ways that social media is ruining the world, but in that particular circumstance, it was the vessel through which I was able to share my story with, people that absolutely never would have heard it otherwise.